Hi everyone. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is thanks very much for picking Salvage to include with the book group. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've had a good discussion, or you're going to have a good discussion later on. So yeah, Linda sent me through some questions, and I thought rather than typing up the answers, it would be a good idea to send a little video of me doing the answers. So I thought that may be a bit more engaging, hopefully. So we'll see how it goes. So I've got the questions, which are really interesting. So the first one was to do with which character was was the easiest to write, and which was a bit more challenging. So Spence was the easiest character to write, because I'd been working on an idea for someone like Spence for ages. And it stemmed from something my dad had said to me about my granddad, who was a hawker of carpets and bits and pieces, and so that was going around doors, same as what Spence does in the book. And my dad had said that my granddad was really reluctant to give up that way of making a living, even as it was becoming apparent it was dying out. So this would have probably been in the late 60s, I think. But he was so proud of that way of making a living, and it was the traditional thing for him to do, and his dad had done it. So he didn't want to give it up, even though it wasn't paying the bills. So I had a really clear-cut idea of a character, and believe it or not, actually, for quite a while, I was working on something that I thought would be a bit like a Scottish Traveller version of Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. So I worked away on that basis for about a year, doing characters. It was very character driven, and at the end of the process, I realised there was no plot. So, but I had 80,000 words. So, but there's no plot is a bit of a drawback if you're trying to write a novel. It tends to need a plot. I discovered this the hard way. So yeah, I went back to the drawing board and started to introduce the idea of child removals, which did help give it a bit more direction. The most difficult character to write was Kate, who's Emma's girlfriend in the story. And I think probably I really struggled at the time when I was writing those scenes with Kate, and I couldn't figure out why, and I kept changing them and rewriting them. But on reflection now, I think it's because Kate's not a major character, but she's not a minor character. She's kind of somewhere in the middle, and she's there as a kind of external influence on Emma and a point of tension with Spence. But I think just because she's not really major, but she's still significant, I just couldn't get those scenes. I just couldn't. It felt like it took ages to get them right. So the next question is, what do I call myself ethnically? I don't self-identify as a traveller. And that's simply because I don't travel. So that's just my personal take on it. But I do say I'm someone with traveller heritage. Both my gran and granddad on my dad's side of the family, they were both from traveller families, so it's quite strong, quite a strong background. So, and I'm really proud of that. The next question is, can you talk about your decision to set the book in 1983? Yeah, so basically it had to be pre-internet and pre-digital, because otherwise all those scenes where Emma's digging around in archives and, dusty libraries and stuff, if, it'd been into the 90s or 2000s, that would have been someone on a laptop looking up digital records, which would have been a bit dull to write about. It's not a great way to do a search. So that was one reason. The other reason was it was kind of dictated by the fact that wee Jenny in the story is she was removed just before the Adoption Act, so that was 1929, so just before the Act got introduced. So that kind of dictated that decades later, like her brother, Nash, towards the end of his life, when he decided he wanted to start looking for her, that kind of suggested it needed to be around about the 1980s, really. So that was the reason it ended up being in 1983. The other question up next is, did I spend a lot of time in archives doing research for the book? I did spend a lot of time in library archives ages ago, before I even knew I was going to do a book, because I spent, and this is about 18 years ago, I was doing a lot of research on my family history and then just generally traveller history. But I did go to the National Library and there found a big old book in the rare collections. It was dusty and I had to get special permissions to read it and wear gloves and stuff. And I did find a whole chapter in there about my own family. So that was really vivid memories from looking at that, and obviously that's a big part of Salvage, is the book, the library book. It's quite pivotal to the plot. Next question is Queen Lachlo a real historical figure? No, she's not, but going back to the book that I found in the library, I discovered an ancestor of mine called Captain William Baillie, who was a leader, a chief of gypsies in southern Scotland, and he was always kind of evading and being chased by the authorities, and so this planted the idea. This character became Queen Lachlo in the book, and I think that's because I liked the idea of strong female characters, and Emma's a strong female character, and I liked the idea of having this juxtaposition of this historical ancestor of hers, who's she discovers as a kind of fierce leader, and that's really symbolised in the scene where Emma goes to the tattoo parlour and she gets a tattoo of the Queen on her arm. The next question is to do with Nash's sexuality. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Nash might be gay, or is at least kind of confused or unsure about his sexuality. The reason that it's in there, well, one, I like the idea of leaving things up to the reader to kind of ponder about. But back when I was drafting it and I didn't know what I was doing, there was just loads of themes in there to do with secrets, family secrets, and one was having a sibling that had been taken away. But Nash didn't like talking about it. Another one was sexuality. But I think one of the ways I learned to develop, I hope, as a writer, as I was doing it, was to learn when you've got too many plot elements, too many themes and subplots, and sometimes it's better just to strip things out and make things simpler, really. So that kind of came out, but there's still little traces of it in there, quite subtle. So I'm glad you've noticed it. So the next one is, both Spence's father and business partner die suddenly. Yeah, they do. It's not based on anything real, but my granddad did, who is kind of, in my mind, he's like Spence. His mum died when he was 14 quite suddenly. But I think, to be honest with you, those deaths that are in there are a bit more just to try and cast Spence as a sympathetic character for the reader. But yeah, I must say, the character of Archie, who does die, who's his business partner, I just really enjoyed writing Archie. He came out really fully formed, and I loved writing those scenes with him and Spence. So I maybe shouldn't have killed him off so quickly. Maybe that was a mistake. Then the next question is from Linda, who's been doing research on Romany settlers in North America, and she came across William Baillie. Yeah. So basically, yeah, he will be an ancestor of mine. The Baillies were, I think, quite prominent Gypsy-Traveller family in southern Scotland. There was three big traveller families: the Blythes, the Faz, and the Baillies. And like I say, the Baillies at various times had a few chiefs or captains going back centuries. So yeah, there's quite a few of us about, definitely. So it's nice to know. Well, a bit unfortunate for William Baillie if he ended up in a tobacco plantation, obviously, but good to know there's a diaspora out there. And then, last question, this one is, what are you working on now? So yeah, the new novel that I'm working on is plays around with this horrible stereotype that Gypsy travellers steal children, which is obviously kind of inverting a theme. The big theme of Salvage is them having their kids taken off them. This is looking at that stereotype, and I think I started thinking about that when I was writing Salvage. It's weird, there's this stereotype about travellers stealing kids, and kind of, where does that come from? What is that? Where does something like that come from? That is a stereotype. Well, a real piece of prejudice, really. So basically, it's set in the 2000s, and it's about a woman who is the manager of a traveller's site. She lives there, she is a traveller, and she manages it, but it's owned by the local authority. And she gets falsely accused of people trafficking or modern day slavery. And there's journalists in it, there's local politicians, and I'm trying to capture a bit what the country was like in the years leading up to Brexit. And there was a lot of really negative news coverage about immigration and asylum seekers from the EU and all this stuff. So I think it's going really well, and I think it's, dare I say it, I think it's better than Salvage. I hope it is. I'm really enjoying working on it, and I think some really good scenes and some good characters in it. So fingers crossed it gets a publisher at some point. So anyway, thanks so much again. I hope you enjoyed the book. And please, if you want to put a review about it on Goodreads or wherever else, please do. But yeah, thank you very much, and bye.